Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So it's that time of year when some people in our society are celebrating Christmas. So naturally, a lot of Muslims have questions about how we should interact with the society. If we are converts, what do we do about our families getting together to celebrate and they invite us? Is it okay for us to go to these family gatherings that are rooted in the Christmas holiday? How should we interact with our coworkers and our neighbors, so on and so forth? So I wanted to record this video because as a convert who comes from a Christian background, I know firsthand what it's like to be in the situation where your family, perhaps once or twice a year, they get together, and one of the times is for Christmas. But now you're a Muslim. Should you go to it? If you don't go, you're going to miss out on meeting with your family. What do you do? So I wanted to talk about my perspective, my experience, and I also reached out to a couple scholars to ask them about this subject, because I wanted to make sure that I understood it properly before I spoke publicly about it. And alhamdulillah, all of them were on the same page. I'm talking about American scholars who were born and raised in America, went abroad, studied, earned PhDs, master's degrees. One was a convert. He comes from a similar background as me. Another comes from an Arab background. Another comes from a Muslim family, but a non-Arab background. Some from the West Coast, some from the East Coast, but mashallah, all of them were on the same page. So there are three main topics I wanted to discuss, and I'm going to take my time with this because those of you who this really affects, inshallah, you'll take the time out and you'll appreciate it and you'll benefit. But hopefully everyone can benefit from this because it's an important topic and it's very relevant and practical. So there's three main issues that I wanted to address. Number one is the Islamic perspective regarding its permissibility of, for example, going to a Christmas party that your family is hosting. Everything in Islam, it has a ruling for it. It's either permissible, prohibited, obligatory, encouraged, disliked. Everything. So I wanted to talk about that. I also wanted to talk about what a holiday is. Getting together to celebrate a holiday, what does that really entail? And what are the underlying factors that we seem to overlook when it comes to these discussions? I wanted to talk about that, as well as maintaining family ties. Because for me, that was my biggest concern. If I don't go to the Christmas party, then I'm basically going to be cutting ties with my family. That was a concern of mine. So I want to talk about those three things. So number one, the permissibility of it. We need to understand a principle when it comes to fiqh, when it comes to Islamic rulings, that many of us misunderstand. So there are general rulings. For example, in general, is going to a Christmas party permissible or not? In general, this is a very straightforward, simple, easy to understand fatwa. I mean, it's obviously something that Muslims should not partake in. Celebrating Christmas, going to a Christmas party, it's obviously something that we shouldn't partake in. So for example, if you ask a scholar overseas this, if you search online, for example, on an Islam Q&A website from a well-known scholar who is qualified overseas, he's obviously going to say it's impermissible. Unfortunately, nowadays in the West, we have imams and du'at who they try to belittle such scholars overseas and act like because they would pass such a fatwa, they don't understand. We should ignore them because they're incapable of passing fatwa for us. They don't know what it's like to go to a Christmas party here. right? Which is absurd, and it's deceitful, and it's misleading. Because in general, this is just a general fatwa that is completely 100% valid. However, when it comes to specific situations, specific people, then you have to look at things on an individual basis. For example, a new Muslim in America, they just became Muslim last week. Should you go to them and tell them it's haram for you to go to this Christmas celebration? You know, let's say that they're in middle school. You know, that might not be the case. Why? Because when it comes to fiqh, you have to weigh the pros and cons. You have to look at the situation. All right? And you can't take a general fatwa and then act as if they said that in relation to a very specific, unique case for an individual living in the West, and act like that means that such a fatwa proves the incompetence of that scholar. That is completely deceitful and incorrect. So what has to be done is you have to evaluate everyone's situation specifically, okay? And a very easy way to understand this is the example of pork. We all know pork is haram. However, if somebody is about to starve to death and all that they can do to save their life is to eat pork, you weigh the pros and cons. You say, if they don't eat the pork, they'll die. If they do eat the pork, they'll be consuming something that's haram. Which is worse? Well, dying is worse. Starving to death is worse. And they're not eating this pork for any other reason than to save their life. Then they can eat that pork. That doesn't mean that pork in and of itself is halal. Just like if somebody is in a specific situation when it comes to celebrating Christmas, going to a Christmas holiday party or gathering with their family, perhaps for them, based on their situation, based on weighing the pros and cons regarding if they do or don't go to it, it might be something that they can go to. However, that doesn't mean that it's halal, that all of a sudden it's permissible to go and to do these things. This is something we have to understand as Muslims. So I'll give you 3 examples of 3 different people who embraced Islam and their experience in this regard. So for example, one of the scholars I talked to about this topic, he said that when he became Muslim and he was faced with this situation of celebrating Christmas, it was very easy for him to not celebrate it based on his family, his situation, who he was, how his family would react to such things. It was very easy. It wasn't problematic at all for him to not celebrate it, for him to not go to a gathering where they were celebrating Christmas. So to imply that, nah, it's okay, there's nothing wrong with it to just go to a family gathering and celebrate Christmas, when, for example, in this person's situation, he would have actually had to go out of his way to celebrate it. This is absurd. This is why you have to take things on an individual basis. Now, a second person who I know personally, a sister in high school who just took her Shahada 2 weeks ago, she had a question about this. Is it okay if I go to the annual Christmas holiday family gathering this year? Now, you have to look at this sister's situation. After getting to know her, understanding that she just took her Shahada, understanding the dynamics of her family, how they're reacting to her taking her Shahada and being a Muslim, and how they're treating her, and what could be the result of telling her that it's haram, you can't go to that gathering, you shouldn't go, even if your parents kick you out the house and disown you, and whatever the case may be, you can't go to it. That's one extreme. That isn't wise, that isn't Islamic. However, there is the other extreme of telling the sister, you know what, there's absolutely nothing wrong with celebrating Christmas. Go to the party, go to the gathering, there's nothing wrong with it. Just make sure that you don't commit shirk, that you don't pray to Isa alayhi salam. Other than that, there's nothing wrong with it. You have to have a balanced view. So in a situation like that, you let the sister know, look, based on your specific situation, it's probably best for you to go to the gathering, but understand that Muslims, we don't celebrate Christmas. And ideally, hopefully, someday in the future, inshallah, you can work things out in a way where you can still maintain your family ties without being put in situations where you are forced to take part in holidays that are against your religion. But, right now, given your case, try to go there, maintain your family ties, try to avoid the haram as much as you can. But for your given situation specifically, you should probably just go and just hate in your heart the things that you see that you know are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is specific to her. For somebody to come out and try to make a general fatwa saying, look, in the West, this is how Christmas parties are. They're actually secular now. And even though they have a Christian background, most people don't even really consider it like that. So just try to avoid any sort of shirk that might take place. But there's nothing really wrong with it anymore. And, the irony of some of the people who are trying to say this sort of thing, they'll discredit scholars overseas saying that they don't understand what these Christmas parties are like. Yet these same individuals, they don't come from a non-Muslim background. They didn't embrace Islam and have to deal with this issue of going to a Christmas party. Have they ever been to a Christmas party? I mean, there's so many different layers to why it's problematic for a Muslim to go to these things. Number one, of course, there is the aspect of shirk, of people worshiping Isa, of saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a son. There is the aspect of imitating the disbelievers. There is the aspect of alcohol consumption, free mixing, music. I mean, there's so many different, it's so multifaceted for people to start trying to push this idea that, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. It's truly hard to believe that this is actually happening. That people who have a position amongst the Muslims, imams, people who are considered to be scholars, are pushing this sort of stuff. It's very, subhanallah, it's very indicative of the end of times. So the third example I wanted to use was my own personal experience. When I first became Muslim, obviously, you don't have a whole lot of knowledge. I mean, there's so much that you have to learn. You want to learn Arabic, you want to learn how to pray, you're trying to read the Quran, understand things properly. You got lots of different people telling you different things, pulling you in different directions. So there's a lot going on. But there are certain things that are clear. It's clear that celebrating Christmas is against Islam. I mean, there should be no debate about that. So I remember having to deal with that. I know that celebrating Christmas, trying to say that Jesus was born then, and you have the shirk that's involved with saying that he's God and the Son of God, and people praying in his name and singing these songs. I know this is against Islam, but I also know that Islam puts so much importance on maintaining family ties. And I felt like if I don't go to some of these gatherings, I'm breaking my family ties. Not to mention that even if somebody understands that this is haram and I shouldn't go to it, not everybody is capable of acting upon that. I mean, we all have shortcomings. It can be very difficult for somebody to try to deal with that. But that doesn't mean we make the haram halal. That doesn't mean we start changing the religion. We might acknowledge, look, it's difficult. May Allah forgive me. I'm going to try to just dislike certain things in my heart, but, sometimes it takes time, especially for new converts. When I first became Muslim, it took me a couple of years to really leave off certain gatherings that I now know was completely inappropriate. Gatherings that now I would never go to. I would never put myself in certain situations now that I did back when I was a new Muslim. So some of it is a gradual process, but people need to understand it's a gradual process. They don't need to be told that the haram is halal. That's what they don't need to be told. Because there are different situations when, for example, I became Muslim and I'm still living with my parents and I'm in my early 20s and I'm still getting on my feet and I'm still learning the deen. My family and friends are still getting used to the idea of me being Muslim. That's much different than where I am now. You fast forward 10 years later, and that new Muslim is married with children. They're financially stable. They have a career. It's completely different. It's a completely different situation. So people should understand that even if at this point in your life, it might be too difficult for you to avoid such gatherings, understand that inshallah in the future, you will be able to work toward not having to put yourself in that situation, yet at the same time being mature enough to maintain those family ties in other ways. So that leads me to the next topic I wanted to discuss, which is, well, maintaining family ties. But before I even get to that, I want us to think about what a holiday is before we move on, because subhanallah, we are belittling what Christmas is really about, man. Think about this. If there was a holiday that was based on celebrating the Holocaust, even if today, not everybody celebrates it for that reason, but there are clear signs that that's the history behind it. Some people still celebrate it for that reason. Nobody, especially a self-respecting Jew, would celebrate or partake in such a holiday. Why? Because you can see that is celebrating the Holocaust. You want me to involve myself as a Jew in that? It's like, you got to be crazy. How can you say that? Another example, slavery. Let's say there's a holiday celebrating slavery, the Africans who were enslaved in America. Do you think any self-respecting African American, or really anybody with any integrity, would celebrate such a holiday, even if they tried to spin it and say, oh, it doesn't mean that anymore? Do you think anybody would do that? So how is it that Muslims reached a point where we have such little fervor and anger for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when people say that he had a son? How does Allah deal with this in the Quran? What does he say about those who talk about a trinity, who talk about Allah had a son? What is Isa alayhi salam, what is he quoted to say in the Quran about this? About people claiming that he told them to worship him. How can we have any sort of dignity or self-respect and be pleased with such a holiday that is based on these sorts of things? We can see the anger towards those other examples. Why somebody wouldn't celebrate the Holocaust or celebrate slavery. But do we care so little about Allah that we don't get upset when people misrepresent him, when people are blasphemous and they worship other than him, when they make false claims about him and his prophets? Subhanallah. One of the roles of holidays as a historical fact, one of the ways they have been utilized is to make certain cultures superior over others. When certain immigrants came to the United States, there were certain holidays that were made national holidays with the underlying intention of making these other cultures submit, be subservient, for certain cultures to maintain a level of superiority over others. So that's something we should think about. Why would a Muslim subject themselves to saying Merry Christmas and going to Christmas parties? That's not to say that we have to be mean or rude, but we can have our own beliefs, right? Because it's one of two things. If it is religious, people should understand that there are religious reasons why we wouldn't partake in that. That's not our religion, our belief. And if it's so secular, why do people care so much if we celebrate it or not? If it's secular, if it's just some, meaningless thing. So no matter how you look at it, Muslims need to have a bit more dignity and integrity and a bit more love for the sake of Allah and hatred for the sake of Allah. Hating things that Allah hates. And I understand it can be difficult to be different, to stand out, to try to do what's right when everyone else is doing what's wrong. But the fact of the matter is, that is part of the spirit of Islam. When everyone else is deviating from the straight path, we are the ones that must maintain and stay on the straight path. When other people are worshiping other than Allah, we are the ones truly maintaining Tawheed and monotheism and worshiping Allah alone. When other people are lying and misrepresenting the prophets and their traditions, we maintain it, we preserve it, we implement it, we spread it. That's what we do. That's what being a Muslim is. Glad tidings to the strangers. Live in this world as if you are a traveler. The Prophet ﷺ told us, grow your beards, trim your mustaches so that you could be different from the mushrikeen. That's what we do. That's who we are. Yeah, that can be difficult, but that's life. You want to get to Jannah without having to go through any test, any hardship? So what's going on with the Muslims today, with the Muslim imams and so-called scholars who seem to have no sort of integrity, no sort of dignity, and they're calling the Muslims to water down their deen? Have we not seen other traditions go through this, water down their religion until people just leave it in droves, till it has no meaning, until their prophets are just made fun of and ridiculed, until they let other pagan rituals infiltrate their own traditions? Do we not learn from what our prophet told us? Do we not learn from history? We see it all around us every day. So the last thing I wanted to say is in regards to maintaining family ties, because this is a major part of Islam, and this is a major part of why it can be so difficult to leave off attending such holidays. So here's the thing. Even if as a new Muslim you go to these gatherings for the first couple of years, inshallah, you can reach a point in your life where you really start reaching out to your family. You don't wait once a year to actually go to them and go to these gatherings. You can be proactive. When I became Muslim, I never before that made such an effort to reach out to my extended family, to be good to my parents and to maintain ties with them and talk to them. You can reach out to your family at other times of the year. You can explain to them your religion, why you don't celebrate these things, but how maintaining these ties is so important to you that you want to meet them at other times. That is okay with your religion. Before Islam, I never used to call my grandparents and relatives and try to meet with them for lunch or call them on the weekends and just ask how they're doing. I never used to do that. After Islam, I started doing these things. Now, some of your relatives, they might never open up to you being Muslim. They might not want to respond to your invitations. They might. But that's not your fault. That's not your problem. You're trying your best. But inshallah, you will also find that your relationship will drastically improve with certain members of your family. Certain members will be very respectful and receptive, and they will take you up on your invitations, and you will be able to actually have a better relationship with them than you would otherwise, just running into them once a year at this gathering with everyone. You might go out with them on a regular basis to eat, visit them a few times a year, and plus you're making a real effort. That's really maintaining family ties, not just going through the motions to one yearly gathering where you say hi. And no, you're actually really going out of your way to maintain family ties, to get to know people, to let them know that you love them, you care about them. So maintaining family ties, yes, it's important. And the same thing goes for being a good neighbor, being a good coworker. We're not saying anyone should be disrespectful. We should still go out of our way to be the best of the society. And if anything, we're pushed even harder to be even better by acknowledging that these sorts of gatherings are inappropriate for us. So we have to show and prove and go above and beyond. And that's just part of being a Muslim. That's part of being from those people who Allah is going to reward with Jannah. And that's what life is all about. Life is about pleasing Allah. So Allah knows best. Anything I said that was correct is from Allah. Anything that I said that was incorrect is from myself and shaitan. May Allah forgive me. May Allah guide all of us. May Allah make it easy for all of us. I know it's not easy. It's not easy sometimes to do what's right when everyone around you is doing what's wrong. But at the same time, that's how you really show Allah who you worship. That's how you really show Allah that everything that you're doing is for His sake. You want Him to reward you. You want Him to be happy to see you on the Day of Judgment, and you want to be happy to see Him on the Day of Judgment. That's what it's all about. So may Allah guide all of us. Jazakum Allahu khairan wa salamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.